testimony. Hey everybody, welcome back to another podcast. I've got Lynn Crenshaw here with me. How are you doing, Lynn?
We're doing really good today so far.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for reaching out about doing the podcast with me. So this is the first time we've officially met.
Yes.
And how did you find Faith Center?
My husband and I got married about 3.5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and we tried a couple of churches for us, not just my church or his church. And I was getting kind of at this last church we were at, and I said, I wasn't even asking God. I was like, I wasn't even thinking about church at that time, and he just said Faith Center, and I'm like, what? And he said Faith Center, and I'm like, I'll talk to Jason. So Jason came home a couple of days later, and he said, God told me we should go to Faith Center. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're going to Faith Center because he told me that 2 days ago. And he's like, okay. So we tried it, and the first service that we went to was in August last year. Pastor John preached a message right at us, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were out the next weekend because we were out of state, and then we came back. And that week, Pastor Jeff preached, and he preached straight at me.
Mm.
And so I signed up for Discovery, and I'm doing greeting. And Jason worked the camera yesterday, and then we're going to be in the van ministry.
Awesome. Have you noticed like a shift in y'all's lives over the past few months?
Definitely in my life. I had a brain injury. It will be 12 years in April. I was mad at God. I was mad at everybody. If you talked about God, you just stay over there, and I'll stay over here, and everybody be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, working way back into church over the years, but Faith Center has really, it's just really been really good it's been good for both of us, but really good for me. It's made me dig a little deeper than what I wanted to dig and that kind of thing.
Yeah, those brain injuries, they can really affect your psyche and your emotions and everything. So those can be very difficult to deal with. Yeah. For sure.
I don't have but 2 physical issues left from it, which is unbelievable since they did not expect me to live through the surgery that night.
Wow.
And so I don't have any hearing in my left ear at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some nerve damage in this arm that bothers me, especially as cold as the weather is tonight.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So,
and you were telling me you're serving in Acts in Action, just recently started doing that. How did you get involved with that?
I saw people with T-shirts and sweatshirts on church, and I'm like, what in the world is that? And my husband knew Virginia Hawthorne family from disc golf.
Oh, okay.
And he introduced us one day, and the next Sunday she had on a sweatshirt. So I reached out to her on Facebook. We met here and talked for a little bit, and then she reached out to Debbie, and Debbie reached out to me, and we met. And I went. December was the first night I'd gone in with them at Lifeline at the Women's Center.
Debbie and Virginia are huge supporters of mine, and so it's awesome how God has these connections in our lives and can work. How has it affected you getting to help those who are struggling or coming out of addiction?
Since I have been in addiction, I was an alcoholic for several years. My husband and I work a recovery program, and so it's just kind of natural. In 2017, God told me, recovery is your ministry. There'll be other things along the way, but recovery is your basic ministry. And that's pretty much what I've tried to do from then for sure on. And when Ladies Living Free first started, I taught a class over there for the first 2 groups of ladies, I think. So it's just kind of, okay, this is natural what I need to get back into. And so Lifeline is where I will be going in with them and doing some other stuff too along the way, I'm sure. But
okay, so let's go back, way back to what was church life like for you growing up?
Every once in a while we would go, Mom and I would go regularly. But Dad never went except on special days like Christmas or Christmas something that I was in or whatever. But most of the time, it was very erratic whether we went or whether we didn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I was, quote, raised in church, but I understood you're really supposed to go to church. And a lot of my friends did. So it was kind of like, why are we not going? But I was an only child, so we just didn't.
Were you curious about God, or did you feel like you had a relationship at all when you were younger?
I was curious because I heard friends talk about church and different things that they did. But really thinking I had a relationship, no. I never even knew I was supposed to.
When did you find the Lord?
Truly finding him, I was 31. I'd been kind of playing in and out of church and doing things, but it really struck me. I was 6 years sober, and I had a relapse.
Wow.
And I was in a really good church, and I'd been there for about a year, and they supported me, and I just thought, okay, I'm not here. I'm only here for one reason, and it's not because of anything I did.
Yeah.
So
even with your adult life, you kind of like were still curious. Like you kind of knew you were supposed to be in this church, but you really weren't sure. And then alcohol comes into the picture. At what point did alcohol come into the picture?
I was 22.
22?
Well, I had been drinking some, but not like that.
Yeah.
Until I was 22. And I quit in 80. Well, no. Yeah, I quit in 86. And then I went back I had one huge relapse, just one time. And it lasted too long. The after effects of it lasted too long. And so in 93, I just totally quit, and I haven't had a drop of alcohol since 1993.
Wow. So you're telling me you're 31 years sober. Is that including the years of sobriety before the relapse? Okay, so we're starting fresh from the new date. So you had a long time without alcohol.
Yes.
What drove you to your relapse?
Issues in my marriage at that point.
Yeah. Your current husband? No? Okay. Yeah, so for me, I'm going on a year of sobriety from my relapse. And so I had about 8 months of sobriety, and then I relapsed. And so here we are going on a full year. So whenever I hear stories of longevity, it's very encouraging. And it's also like something to always be vigilant about, because, hearing 6 years of sobriety, that's a long time. And, especially if we're not sure of our faith, or we're not sure of who we are in Christ, those temptations are so much stronger.
Right.
Especially, see, for me, like that was a big thing that drove me to drinking, was any adversity. It didn't have to be necessarily with my wife, but a lot of times those issues kind of stew up in relationships, and then next thing you know, here you are with the relapse. How long did your relapse last?
One day of the drinking, and then 3 days of just being deathly ill after.
Oh, wow. Okay.
My ex did not want to quit drinking when I did, and he hid it pretty well. He would hide it in different places. But he and I had been into a huge argument, and him and my son had gone to his mom's, and I found it.
And so then you get back on track, and that's whenever you kind of really start diving into a relationship with the Lord. What did that look like for you?
I had begun the relationship the year before, but was still I was in a Pentecostal type non-denominational church, and I'd never been in that type of situation. And so it was very new, and but I had some really good people that kind of picked me up and said, and stood with me. And so it it affected my relationship just because then I felt so guilty and condemned. You know, I condemned myself. He didn't. So
Whenever I finally reached out for help, Pastor Jeff is who I've been counseling with, and he always says there's something that kind of like stems like why we drink. There's like a reason why we drink. Do you know what the reason was for you?
I do.
What was it?
My first husband was physically abusive, and then I got back together with him, and that got worse, as well as other types of abuse.
Yeah.
And one particular thing that happened over and over and over, which was sexual abuse, I couldn't do it after that by myself. I just decided, that's just when it just hit. Because I'd been drinking off and on, and nothing big until then. But he was an alcoholic and a drug addict.
Yeah, alcohol, it's a huge aggressive factor in a relationship. What is the mindset like whenever you're in a relationship where you're being abused? What was your mindset in that season?
Anything to survive. I had a daughter that was 2, or we had a daughter that was 2. I think, yeah, she was 2. And my mindset was, there was some suicidal ideation, but then there was like, I cannot leave her with him because I don't know what he'll do at 2 years. You know, I don't think he would have done anything, but you never know. You know, so I just was like, I have to stay alive for her, and she would be in her crib, and I would be in there talking to her like she was an adult, but she was asleep. She didn't know the difference. You know, but I knew that that was it. Anything to do to survive. And we finally split totally. We were in Benton, and I moved back to Paducah and never looked back.
I've had Virginia on the podcast and Anna Yonts. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but both of them have physical and sexual, or at least physical for sure, assault as part of their testimonies. And it's one of those things that really seems like it's kept quiet, but it seems like so many women struggle and deal with it. As someone who's experienced abuse in your past, is it something that still affects you today?
Not as much today, thanks to recovery.
Yeah.
Working through the steps and with women that I trusted and didn't know very well, but still women that I trusted, and just feeling that camaraderie, or however you want to say it, the friendship and that relationship. And then my husband now, he and I have both been in recovery for several years. So it's just the fact that you just, at first you learn to just kind of push it back if you can. And then when it comes up, you run for help somewhere.
Yeah.
I just knew my help could not come from alcohol anymore. But I had some really good friends, and some of those people that were at that church, that very first church, I've known them since the early 90s, and I'm still really, really good friends with several of them. So I have those people to say, hey, this is going on, talk me through it, or, let me talk it out or whatever. And then I have my sponsor and accountability partners as well. Plus then Debbie and Virginia and the rest of the ladies at Acts in Action. So it always helps to have those people. The problem is sometimes we tell too much to somebody that doesn't keep it to themselves. So you have to learn who you can trust and who you can't trust.
Yeah.
But you just have to survive the best you can with the help of godly people.
Yeah. What do the steps of recovery look like? What do they look like for you?
Different things at different times, depending on what I'm dealing with. If you're dealing with your alcohol or the sexual abuse or that kind of thing, that's one thing. But then if you're dealing with codependency or depression or whatever, so it always looks different to me, because that's the way. When I look through those questions that go along with the steps, and I'm thinking, okay, in this point in time in my life, what does this mean? How do I answer this question for me now, not me then, not me in the future? because we can look back to the past and answer questions all totally wrong. And then you're not working what you need to work. But,
Yeah.
and everything we do right now, the recovery ministry is online. So I meet people from North Carolina to West Virginia to New York to Texas to North Dakota, Nevada, and it's, even though our culture is a little different in each of these counties, each of these states, and each of these cities, a lot of the women still deal with the same thing.
Yeah. So you really just try to address them and then what they're struggling with at that moment.
And me too.
Right.
Yeah.
And then go from there. Like, this is where I'm at, or this is where they're at. Let's start where you're at. I think that's something that sometimes people try to make this like broad, paint broad strokes and try to fix everybody all in the same. And not every situation is the same. They might have similar stories, but each person is unique. And so whenever, you're helping these people coming out of addiction, what's the advice that you try to give them that you wish maybe you had at one point, or maybe it's advice you've received that's helped you?
I wish at that time in the early 90s that there was something here that was Christ-centered. The only thing was here was AA, basically, at that point.
Right.
But I think the thing is, what has helped me more than anything, and this is what I tell them, talk it out. Talk it out with somebody. And if you don't have anybody to talk it out with, take that empty chair over there and pretend somebody's sitting in it and talk it out. Because we hold it so in, or I hold it in, but if I hear it with it coming out of my mouth, then it's more real, and I can work through it better. And most of the women that I talk to say, yeah, that's, with two of my sponsees, I use the Marco Polo app. And this one lady, they're working on other things besides substance abuse. And so I told this one lady, she's marriage stuff and kid stuff and some other stuff with her. And I said, if you need to talk it out and I'm not available, throw it up on that Marco Polo app. Talk it out, and I'll see it just as soon as I can. And she's like, that helps me so much, just to be able to hear myself talk about it and get it out of me somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because if we hold it in, I learned when I was a kid, you don't talk about anything to anybody at any time, anywhere. You just don't talk about it. And so you stuff hurt on top of hurt on top of hurt. Then what do you do with it? You're 40, 50 years old or however old, and you've still got all this junk down here that you don't know how to get rid of. So if you talk it out, to me, that helps me more than anything else. And a lot of them will say, yeah, that's what I need. I used to have a stuffed animal that I would talk to. I would just sit and set it up in a chair or something, and just to hear myself talk and hear myself say what's really going on in here that maybe nobody was available to talk to at the time.
Yeah, there's so many times where we're just thinking through the circular motions.
Yes.
And then when we say it out loud, it's like, that was, why am I thinking that way? Then it kind of dawns on you, like, this is more serious than just the thought that I was just thinking. Like, there's a little bit more weight to it whenever you put it out of you. And it also helps you to release it from inside because you just bottle it in. And it's crazy that there used to be, and there still is, it's not like it's something that's completely gone, this mindset that all of your like dysfunctional family stuff has to, like, you have to keep it all inside. There's no one you can talk to. Like, you should be able to talk to your parents about this kind of stuff, but you end up bottling it all in, and then next thing you know, you're a grown adult with all these things that you maybe never have really learned how to like deal with.
Yeah. I think some of my family knew about the physical abuse, but they never knew about the sexual abuse because I didn't feel like I could talk about it.
Yeah.
And until I got into recovery, I couldn't talk about it.
Was it something that was happening when you were young?
I was 21, 22.
Oh, did I already ask you that? I'm sorry if I did.
But no, it was it was in that time period because we split when I was 22, and so it was right in that time period.
Yeah.
And I never looked back, and he never looked back, and he passed away from a drunk driving accident.
That's got to be hard to deal with whenever you're married to the person, because you have. Had that started happening before you were married, or was this something that grew as the relationship?
We divorced and then got back together a little bit later, and it started happening when we finally decided this is it. We're not doing this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it was close to Christmas, so we waited till after Christmas for our daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And then we split, and so all these 3 or 4 months, or I think it was 3 months, in between deciding what we were going to do and doing what we said we were going to do, that's when it happened, because he would go out drinking or whatever he was doing with other people, with his friends.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's when it all happened.
So whenever you kind of get fully involved in, like, I believe in Jesus, did you see like a transformation in your life? Or did that take some time?
It took a little time because I still needed to be able to trust somebody to talk about it.
Right.
And to really ask the questions I needed to ask for myself. But I didn't know who to trust in this church. I'd been there a few months, and I knew a few people, but still I was just really iffy about asking the questions I felt like I needed to ask. If I didn't understand something in Scripture or whatever, then I would kind of do it on my own until I really trusted these few women and a couple of men, their husbands, so that I could ask the questions, and I knew they knew what they were talking about. Because I'd sit with them in Sunday school and I would hear all the conversations. So it took me probably a year and a half or so to really feel like I was like probably where I needed to be at that time, and then I knew I could move forward.
Yeah. Did you when did you get introduced to like the Holy Spirit and things like that?
At that church.
Okay.
Because I had gone to Methodist or Baptist churches, and then when I got to that church, I went with a friend that I worked with, and we visited, and then I started going, and it was a non-denominational, but it was more of a Pentecostal type non-denominational church, and you saw the speaking in tongues and the interpretations and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, which was kind of
shocking, right?
Shocking to me at first. But by the time I really realized what was going on and not just in shock from being in church, I was able to say, okay, to this friend or that friend, what was that Sunday? What was that this morning? And so I learned it pretty quick. Yeah. Of the proper ways and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I didn't get into, it just happens and you don't, I learned it the biblical way, not the world's way, what they think.
I really appreciate the way John preaches about it, and even when there's tongues at our church, how he kind of does a really good job of articulating, like if he's about to give a word or something, he'll really like make sure to go over, because like sometimes that can be a lot for people, especially if they've never experienced it. So I do like appreciate the way he explains it beforehand, because a lot of places they'll just go right into it, or they'll be praying in tongues through the microphone as they're praying. And I'm kind of more used to some of that stuff. I've been raised around a lot more of that Holy Spirit, Pentecostal stuff. So it's not like totally off-putting to me, but for some people that can be like enough for them to want to, get up and get out of there. You know what I mean? So I do appreciate there being at least enough explanation to where people can maybe hopefully wrap their head around that. You know what I mean?
My husband was raised in a very strict Church of Christ family. So that it was, to him, he just did not know what to do with it. But then before we got married, something was going on with my daughter, and I don't remember what that was. And I called my friend and her husband. And so we're sitting there, we're talking, and Tony starts speaking in the spirit. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, what's he thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And we got off the phone, and my husband said, that is the first time I've ever heard that I believed it was true. Okay, good. Because it was true. It was,
Right.
And he said, and he told me, he said, Lynn, he said some things about me that 99% of the people that I know don't know. But Tony got it up from the spirit and talked to Jason about it. And Jason was just blown away. And he loves Faith Center.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in his element. He feels like doesn't feel like he's uncomfortable. A couple of the guys that I've known for years make sure they come up and say something to him the first few Sundays we were there, and that's made him feel really comfortable. Knowing that he knows these guys. Plus, he also comes to Life Group.
I feel like that's one of the most powerful giftings of the Holy Spirit that is kind of not as big is the discernment. When someone reads your, I have people come on the podcast constantly saying that Pastor John read their mail, or someone says stuff that no one else knows. You can hear someone speaking in tongues, but then whenever they give you that word, or when that sermon you come to, the first sermon you come to is like, man, that is for me. That's those confirmations of the Spirit, and the confirmations we've been having at a rapid rate in our church family. It's such an amazing season to be a part of, to see these words that Pastor John is giving to the congregation coming true in my family's lives. And then other people in the church being able to discern and use that gifting. It's really awesome to be a part of.
I went to Oasis Christian Center for years.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those people that were there when I was there are at Faith Center.
Okay.
And I wondered a lot of times, why are these people there? What's drawing them to stay and all that kind of thing? And when we walked in that first Sunday, one of the women that I've known for years was the first person that we saw, and she saw us. And it's just been really comfortable for me because I know several people. There's a lot of people there I don't know because it's big, but I know several people, and it's just been really nice for me to be able to feel like I can minister in a way that maybe I haven't before, or not since my brain injury. Anyway, I just hadn't even felt like I could,
Yeah, so you want to tell us a little bit more about what happened with the injury and everything?
I was at my pastor's house at the time, and they had a basement and the garage. You walk down the stairs from the main floor and walk through their little living area into the basement. I was with his wife, and we were going to church for a meeting on Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to walk through their kitchen to get to the landing of the stairs. And I knew the landing was there. It wasn't that. I remember walking into the kitchen, but I don't remember walking out of the kitchen. And I started down the stairs. She said something to me, and she turned around because I didn't answer her. She turned around and said something. She said, and you just weren't there. Your eyes, you just knew. And she said, I think she's kind of stepped over to the side of the stairs, and I fell the rest of the way down the stairs and landed on my head.
Wow.
On a carpet-covered concrete floor.
Yeah.
And cracked my skull open back on the left side, and then had a brain bleed on the right side.
Yeah.
So then he comes from the church. He was already there, and one of the deacons and his wife were there, and they're both RNs.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came with him to the house. And then the ambulance, we were out pretty good ways from where the ambulance service is on Coleman Road. The ambulance happened to be 2 minutes away, 2 miles away.
Wow.
From where we were. And everybody has told me, of course, they got there in record time.
Yeah, Coleman Road is a little bit out there in the country, just a little bit.
Well, and we were in the country. We were out on Old 60.
Okay, yeah.
And so, it was still a little hike through the mall area.
Mm-hmm.
But The neurosurgeon got there in record time on a Sunday night, which is kind of unusual, you know. My mom and dad were in Florida, southern Florida. My son's in Lexington, and my daughter is in Wisconsin. I had no family here except my cousin and my aunt.
Wow.
You know, and so, but everybody from the church, somebody stayed at the church and said, we're not having our meeting tonight. Lynn's at the hospital, and everybody convened at the hospital. My daughter said, she said, I walked in and she said, Mom, I've never seen so many people in my life that were all there because you were there. And so I was on ventilator from Sunday night to Wednesday. And they tried to take me off the ventilator for 3 times on Wednesday. They had church service, and he sent out a phone thing that he had that said, we're not having Bible study tonight, we're having prayer time. That's all we're doing. And so after he got home, my daughter called him and said, Mom's off the ventilator. And he said, can you tell me about what time they were able to do that? And she told him it was right in the middle of prayer time at church. And then I was in the hospital on Saturday, Saturday I went to a regular room and I was in the hospital for another week. But then I went to a nursing home for 2 weeks for physical therapy and stuff. And then I went home. Had to learn how to walk and a lot of different things like that. Couldn't have walked up those stairs. I couldn't have walked up the steps outside without. I couldn't walk maybe 5 feet without holding on to something.
Yeah.
So just had to build up the strength and all that. They told me I'd never walk. I'd never drive. I'd never live by myself. I'd never work a computer again. And they told my kids I'd probably be in a fetal position for the rest of my life and require 24-hour care the whole time, the rest of my life.
Wow.
I have done everything to the letter that they told me I would not do.
Yeah.
And so.
Were you able to speak? What was your vocabulary affected?
Yeah, and sometimes it still is. I'll look at a word and I think, I know how to say this word, but it's something I haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah.
And I'll struggle with it. So, yeah, it was. A lot of things were affected that I would never have thought about being affected by anything. I mean, you take so much for granted when you're healthy.
Yeah.
Or semi-healthy, you know.
Yeah.
But it took a long time for me to be able to walk well enough to go anywhere by myself. I didn't drive from March till October. I didn't have seizures, though, which is one of the things that the doctors were really amazed at.
Mm-hmm.
So, that wasn't why I was not driving, but I knew if I have to stop really fast, my legs aren't strong enough. I'm going to kill somebody or kill myself or hurt somebody or whatever. So I just didn't drive until I felt like I was strong enough.
Yeah.
But they found out that while I was in the hospital, I have what they call a heart block, which meant my heart rate went so low that I just wasn't there. And so I have a pacemaker that keeps my heart in the right rhythm and heart rate.
Yeah.
So that I don't do that again.
So in the beginning, you're mad, obviously. You said you were angry at God. Obviously a miraculous story of coming all this way. What was that season like? What was the tribulation like? And how did you get yourself back on track to where you were able to, move forward with the Lord?
I was really mad, and I knew better. Really, in my head, I knew better. And it wasn't God's fault, but He could have stopped it. That was my thought. And He didn't. That's why I was mad. And I didn't want to live like that. I didn't want to be a burden to my children. My mom and dad were older, and I knew they're not going to be around forever, you know. And so, because I was in my mid-50s when I fell. And so learning how to walk and all that kind of stuff was just, And so I guess it took me, Mom and Dad moved back to Florida like a year later, right around a year later. And I lived by myself until Jason and I got married 3 years ago. But it took time to get the strength. It took time to make myself understand that it wasn't God's fault. And he could have stopped it, but there was a reason he didn't. And that's the thing that I had to finally grasp was, okay, God, this happened, so why? What is the good in this? How are you going to use this to help somebody else or whatever, And then it was in 2017 when I went to the Celebrate Recovery Summit, and I went to dinner with a friend that lived close on my way home. And God said, this is it. Recovery is your ministry. I've told you this. You must not have believed me, so now I'm telling you again, kind of. And so then it still was a work in progress. And until I got into this program that I'm in now, I was still a little mad at God. And I working the steps with this program.
Yeah.
The first group that I did.
Well, even Pastor John was touching on it Sunday. I think so many people are taught that, like, if something happens to you, it's because of God. And so many people, especially whenever it comes to something traumatic, like an injury or losing a family member, we typically question God. It's like a very normal human response. Yeah. People who don't even believe in God will blame God for things. It's like, right. But, for me, I always go back to reminding myself that there's an enemy who wants to steal, kill, and destroy. So there was an attack on your life that night, no doubt about it. Now, whenever it comes to, like, God allowing things, and Pastor John is very firm in his belief that, like, God just doesn't do things like that. Yeah. And so it's something that I've had to wrestle with internally, and something I haven't really dived into on the podcast too much, because I am in the middle of reading the Old Testament, and even John was talking about how the testing was part of that old covenant, and so now I have to, like, learn what I've been going to Faith Center my whole life, basically. So I know there's a difference between old covenant and new covenant, but when you see God testing people, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So all this stuff that John's been teaching a lot on lately, even though it's not necessarily new, it's still something that I feel like I'm learning in my heart, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do remind myself that, like, God has a perfect will. Now, sometimes we get out of his will. And so then there's an enemy, and then there's also our flesh and us making mistakes, right. And sin entered the earth. So things like that are going to happen. And there's this whole spiritual warfare that's happening around us, even now as we speak, that I think sometimes we just kind of forget about in our day-to-day life. But when you're in the middle of it, like you were, like, it's kind of hard to convince yourself of some of that stuff. And so it's really something that you have to walk out with God. And I think that it's something that you have to, because, like, otherwise you're going to just constantly, you're never going to get anywhere. But I don't, like, when David was, like, pleading with the Lord, he would, like, plead and like, he would talk to God, like, legit. So I think it's, like, okay to be, like, God already knows your heart.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're mad, Lord, I'm mad. Like, I feel like there's a healthiness to that relationship where you can be honest, in respect and honor, but say, Lord, I'm mad. I don't understand why this happened. I feel like you did it. Why do I feel like this? What happened? What was the purpose? And he gave you the reason. And, your job on this planet wasn't finished yet. And he saved you, and he pulled you out from where you shouldn't have even been able to walk. And here you are, able to sit and share your testimony and walk around and be healthy. It really is awesome to see what God did through your testimony.
What's really strange, I stayed in my room when my mom and dad moved back up here for a year and I stayed with them. And I stayed in my room most of the time. I had a television, And I would just sit in there. Pastor would come by and say, once a week, and say, "Have you read your Bible today?" And I'm like, "Nope."
Mm.
"When are you going to?" "Don't know." You know, I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like, leave me alone about it. And so I was like, okay. But I was watching television, and a Wounded Warrior Project commercial came on.
Mm.
And it was these guys that some of them had limbs missing or whatever, and they were putting them in canoes or kayaks or something, and they were getting to get out on the water and that kind of thing. And I was sitting there watching that commercial, and God said, "So why are you feeling so sorry for yourself?"
Mm.
And it was like a slap in the face, which, I mean, he might not especially meant it that way, but that's the way it happened. And then I started kind of thinking about it, but still, I was still mad. This was like 6-8 months in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still mad. It just took me a long time to really realize that, yeah, the enemy tried to take me out that night. And actually, that was on a Sunday night, not the Friday before that, but the Friday the week before. I had been giving my testimony at Celebrate Recovery, standing on that stage at Faith Center, and passed out.
Oh,
Literally in the middle of my testimony.
Mm.
And so he actually tried to take me out that night, but it didn't work.
Mm.
And so then he had to wait a week or so and do it again. It just finally had to sink into my spirit that God didn't do this. The enemy did it, and there's a reason why he did it. And there's a reason why God's leaving me here to testify about it, because I had begged God and begged him for months before that commercial I saw, just let me die. Just let me die. Just leave me alone. Let me die, and all will be good. And he didn't. So the more I begged and the more he didn't, the more madder I got.
Yeah.
You know? But it's hard to figure out. I mean, I'd been through the trauma of the physical abuse and all of that, but this was a trauma I'd never seen before with anybody.
Yeah.
I'd never seen anybody with a brain injury, although people don't understand concussions are brain injuries, and if you have multiples, then you're in pretty bad shape, or you can be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd just never seen anybody with a brain injury that had been through those kinds of things, so I didn't have any idea what to do.
I think it's something that hasn't been really talked about until the last maybe decade or a little bit longer, of where it's really been. I mean, I like sports, so I listen to sports talk radios and stuff, and they talk about it now more, but I don't think it was something that you could really, I mean, you'd have to go seek it out, like that community with, like, you know, with addicts. You can go find a community of people who used to be, you know, AA meetings, and that's something awesome about Paducah. There's so many recoveries you can get it, but with that kind of traumatic thing, you do kind of, I bet you felt like alone in it.
Very.
Yeah.
Abandoned in a lot of ways. Even though my mom and dad were right there, still, they don't understand what's happening any more than I did. So there was an abandonment kind of thought process with that.
I feel like that is one of the biggest attacks from Satan, is to make you feel abandoned. Because if he can steal that feeling of, like, you're put here for a specific purpose, like you're in the Lord's hands, like you are his daughter. If he can steal that from you and make you feel abandoned and alone, man, we are at our weakest point whenever we feel alone and we don't have anybody. If we just feel like we have nobody.
Yeah. And I think that, and that's, I think with the physical abuse and that kind of things, that was a very familiar feeling to me anyway.
Yeah.
So it was really easy to go back to that.
Right.
You know.
You had already been down that road, so it's a little bit easier to go down it. Yeah. Whenever I was an addict, I was constantly making myself a victim.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what is the biggest takeaway you want people to have when they hear your testimony?
When you go back into all of the years, my 68 years, there's a lot that happened. There's a lot of things that should not have happened that I caused or that other human beings caused.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't God's fault.
Yeah.
None of it was God's fault. It was, and when I do my testimony at different places, just speaking my testimony, one of the first things I say is, this is not my story. This is God's story that he tells through me.
Amen.
Because it's his story. I had nothing really to do with it. I really messed it up. If you put me on my if you leave it to me, I can really mess it up really fast. So leaning on him, that's all you can do in any situation. You know, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, I tried writing my own story for a long time, and I was writing a really bad one. You know, our testimonies is like what Jesus has done in our lives. That's why I love sharing them with people, because even to people who don't believe, to put life into, it's not just a guy who lived on the planet 2,000 years ago. Like, he lives in us. And without him, we wouldn't be here to share with you what he's brought us out of.
Right.
Because I was leading myself down a life of death and destruction. You know, and some people have testimonies where you're like, you could understand why they ended up the way they did. You know, a lot of traumatic things happened to them. I didn't have all that. I caused a lot of it myself. Yeah. And without Jesus, you know, I wouldn't be here. I would be in a terrible place. So it's truly awesome to get to hear a testimony of someone who has 31 years of sobriety. It's so encouraging, because it's a big thing I talk about on here, obviously, with being a former alcoholic myself. And I just hope that it encourages anyone out there to, you know, get on the right track, you know, get sober, accepting the Lord, whatever it looks like in their life. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to share with the people?
Stay in this Christ-centered recovery program.
Yeah.
Because in other programs, you don't hear about Christ. But if you go into a Christ-centered one, then you know where their information's coming from. You know, it's coming from Scripture, God's Word. Otherwise, you may be... I've never been in AA or any of those, but I've watched people come into Christ-centered recovery from those programs, and they were blown away what God did in their life that they didn't recognize because it had never really been talked about.
Yeah, I think recovery, I think the community aspect is just a huge part of that. And then for me, I don't know, I haven't done the recovery meetings, but for me, counseling has been a huge help for me. So that's what that's the avenue I went down. I think I would like to eventually get more involved in recovery, and because I feel like I could help. I feel God's given me a gifting of teaching, so I feel like I could really like show them stuff in the Word, and so I feel like I could really, you know, touch people in that avenue. I haven't really prayed about it enough or really sought that out, but thank you for what you're doing. I think it's awesome that you're getting involved in Acts in Action. I think it's so cool how you haven't been coming to church very long, and then you reached out to share your testimony. It's so awesome how the Lord works. I'm
writing it to do in a couple of other venues. Well, one at Lifeline when we go in with Acts in Action, but the Celebrate Recovery in Mayfield, although I am not part of Celebrate Recovery, he asked me to do my testimony there because the first night I went, he found out I was 31 years sober.
Yeah.
And so he was like, our people need to hear that.
There's not a lot of people with that much sobriety under their belt.
No, there's
not. That is a very amazing testimony. And not to factor in the 6 years of sobriety, you know, so you've had to fight the good fight twice.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing people don't understand is if you don't stay with it, if you don't stay with in that close relationship with Christ and other believers that are healthy enough that they help you along the way, and you can rely on them to talk to. I don't know how people survive.
Yeah.
After alcoholism or drug addiction. My husband had some different issues than what I had. We met at Faith Center in Celebrate Recovery.
Wow, that's awesome.
In that building, and now we're going to church there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Neither one of us were. So it's just a matter of sticking close to Christ. Christ is the only answer that we need, although we think we can figure it out ourselves. And I've been known to say, okay, God, you're not doing this fast enough. I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's not in our timing.
Yeah, patience is constantly something that we can grow in, isn't it?
Yeah, and I still need to grow in it a lot.
Yeah, I think it's something that you don't realize you're getting tested in it while you're being tested in it.
Yeah.
My wife and I just bought a home, and we were looking for like 2 years. So we had this like long time of where I was just like, Lord, what is happening? I just feel like you just start feeling like lesser than, and all these doubts and insecurities and stuff. And now that it's happened, I told my wife, like, we need to remember this, because this was a season of patience that we had to endure. And I wasn't always perfect. There were times where I was very fleshy, like, Lord, what's going on? But for the most part, I feel like I was reminding myself, I did the things to correct myself. I got myself back in line. And I think I totally agree with what you were just saying is, we have to stay vigilant in our relationship with the Lord and our relationship with others, especially people who have former addictions, because some people, I've had testimonies of the addiction just taken away and they never have another thought about it. I was just sharing a couple weeks ago that there's still times where I might have an urge. Mm-hmm. And so it's so important that we share all the different types of testimonies and say, stay vigilant, don't catch yourself slipping. One of the best pieces of advice Pastor Jeff gave me was setting boundaries for myself.
Oh, yeah.
Because you think you're going to be all holy and spiritual, but your flesh is going to happen. And so you have to set physical boundaries for yourself. And it's something that I feel like couldn't be said enough.
One of the things in 2017, there was a lot of stuff going on in my life, and I really wanted to go by the liquor store and get something. But I had 4 friends, I think, because I lived by myself. I had 4 friends that had keys to my apartments because I was having some physical issues too. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't figure out where I could hide it that they wouldn't find it if they came into my apartment. So I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want them mad at me if for no other reason, Yeah. And I was like, okay, if she came in here and I asked her to do something, where would she go to look for it? Nope, she can't hide it in the kitchen. Nope, can't hide it in the, I couldn't figure out where I could hide it where they couldn't find it if I needed something and they were looking for whatever I was looking for. So I just didn't go get it.
Yeah, it's so funny sometimes the kind of gymnastics we have to do to convince ourselves.
Yeah, and I wouldn't go out at night by myself.
Yeah.
Because it would be too easy to slip in a liquor store and nobody see me.
Yeah.
During the day, they were at work or whatever, they wouldn't see me,
Mm-hmm.
So I just didn't go out at night by myself. I didn't go anywhere. I'd stay home.
Yeah.
So we just have to figure out what works best for us. And, accountability, that's the biggest thing that we can, along with Christ, the accountability of other believers and other people that will hold us accountable. Some of those friends that I have won't ever call me out on anything. And then some friends will be, now, wait a minute, Lynn, this is not right. Or why aren't you doing this instead of that? They'll question me on it, which is what I need.
Yeah.
And I don't know anybody that really doesn't need that.
Yeah, earlier you said something about trusting people who would share your stuff with people you didn't want to know. So finding those few that you can trust, and that when they hold you accountable, it's from a place of love. And even if sometimes it might be a little bit on the harsher end, right, you can accept it because you know that they love you and they care for you. So being held accountable, it's one of the most important things. That's why it's so important for, for me and my wife, for you and your husband to hold each other accountable. And then those friendships, Pastor Garrett, he's our youth pastor. He was he was the one I admitted to that I was getting sober the first time, and he was the one I talked to about relapsing and getting sober the second time, and he helped hold me accountable. And it's things like that that you hold on to. You remember those moments, and you think, "Thank God for that." Yeah. You know what I mean?
You were talking about patience a minute ago. December the 26th of 2023, my husband got a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
So February, sometime around the 1st of February was his first treatment. He had 35 radiation treatments in his throat, in this area. And then he had 3 chemos. Talking about patience. I'm not used to somebody being in the apartment with me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, and he and I, and he was used to being, he's a semi-driver, so he was used to being on the road all the time. So it takes patience, but we learned a lot about each other. And we'd only been married 2.5 years when that happened. And we went through until April, the first part of April, with him at home, doing his treatments, and then a month and a half at home until he could go to work.
Yeah.
And so you just have to learn patience. But he and I, both being Christians, helped so much. Even though when I look back on it, I think, man, I was not a nice person. I was mean at this point in time because I was so frustrated and scared and everything else. And he had to be too. Why was I saying that? But he knew that I was as scared as he was probably. He was afraid of dying, and I was afraid of losing him. So it was all, intertwined. So we just have to, Jesus is the only thing we can cling to, truthfully.
Yeah, those heightened emotional moments, they're tough. One of the constant reminders that I have to remind myself of is like thinking about what she's feeling, I think that's one of the best learning things that you can learn throughout your marriage, and something you'll never stop learning is how to kind of be selfless, to not be selfish, and kind of learn how to, because it's a constant ebb and flow of a relationship that you have to work on. And we're all human, and we all have our moments of not being the best, you know what I mean? So it's a blessing, though.
I appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on, and maybe I can have your husband come on, or anyone else that you God puts on your heart, send them my way, and we'll share their testimony on here.
He's usually out on the road on Mondays.
Yeah.
So it would have to be a different night.
Yeah, we could work that out.
But he's having surgery Wednesday, so he will be home for a couple of weeks, probably at least the whole week. So I don't know, but yeah, he would love. He said, "Be sure," because the guy at Celebrate Recovery has only met Jason once. I've been over there a few times. He's like, "Be sure and tell these people I have a testimony too." And I'm like, "I know, I will. They know because of what I've said already,
Yeah.
But so, and he loves to tell people what the Lord's done for him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the only way that some people can get. You look at somebody with 1, 2, 5 years, and that's a feat in itself.
Mm-hmm.
The first 30 days is a feat in itself.
Yeah.
But then the longer you go, people look at you like, that's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is, because I'm standing right here in front of you.
Yeah, someone in the middle of addiction, they can't even wrap their head around 30 years. They're just like, what? Yeah. And you and your husband have such a unique testimony in the fact that you guys lived so much life not married. And so you guys got married. Right. So like you guys were people, like fully grown, and like you had your own ideas. So then kind of having to like give up some of that, or not give it up is maybe not the right word, but I'm sure there's a big testimony in that as well.
Well, you get kind of in your own routine, and you don't want anybody to mess it up.
Yeah.
And then you've got this other human being coming in and saying, "Wait a minute, Lynn, we need to do such and such." And I'm like,
yeah,
okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that, and then I'll do this later. It's just a matter of learning to work together. But we've both been married before, and we both have kids, so it's it's a feat that neither one of us ever thought we'd get married again after
Yeah.
the last ones. And it's just like, I mean, we didn't speak for 4 years after we've been friends for a year, and we didn't speak for 4 years.
Wow.
And he called me one night and he said, I realized what a bud I've been, or I was back then. He said, I need to make amends.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, we'll see what happens here. And 4 months later, we're getting married.
Mm.
So, you know, and that, yeah, that is a testimony in itself, just because we'd both been through so much with exes that we were done,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So.
All right, guys, we'll wrap it up for tonight. I'll talk to y'all next time. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for checking out the WBF podcast, or as it's called, Walk by Faith. I think testimonies are so important. It gives us power over the enemy, and I really hope that these encourage you and bless you. And if you like the episode, please just share it with your friends and family. That's the biggest way you can support. Like and subscribe on the Spotify page or wherever you're watching. If you want to know about giving, just click the link below. But the biggest thing you can do is share this with somebody else, because you never know which testimony is going to touch somebody in your life. So I hope to see you guys next time, and thank you again.